Have you ever wondered how quickly an ordinary night can become the moment that changes everything? Rain whispered across the windshield as Marcus Reed guided his aging gray sedan along a quiet suburban road outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The streets were nearly empty, their glossy pavement reflecting rows of amber streetlights that stretched into the darkness like endless ribbons of gold. Only 20 minutes earlier, he had been sitting across from his mother at her small kitchen table, smiling over a homemade peach cobbler while an old soul record played softly through worn speakers. Her laughter still echoed in his mind, warm enough to follow him into the cool night air. She had hugged him before he left and reminded him, just as she always did, to drive safely and never let the world steal his kindness. Marcus smiled to himself as he adjusted the heater one notch higher. Then bright blue lights suddenly exploded inside his rearview mirror. Their flashing reflections swallowed the peaceful road behind him. Without hesitation, Marcus eased his sedan onto the shoulder, switched off the engine, lowered his window, and rested both hands calmly on the steering wheel where they could easily be seen. His breathing remained slow. His face revealed nothing but quiet patience. Experience had taught him long ago that panic solved nothing, while patience often revealed everything. Two officers stepped out of the patrol vehicle with measured confidence. Their boots splashed lightly through shallow rainwater as they approached from opposite sides of the sedan. The older officer, Daniel Brooks, carried himself with the relaxed certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His younger partner, Ryan Cooper, scanned the surrounding area before shining a flashlight across the interior of Marcus's vehicle. The beam drifted over family photographs tucked beside the visor, a folded umbrella in the back seat, and a neatly organized overnight bag resting behind the driver's seat. Brooks leaned toward the open window with a practiced smile that felt more rehearsed than friendly. "Evening, sir. License and registration, please." Marcus handed over both documents immediately. "Of course, officer." His voice remained respectful, calm, and steady. Brooks studied the driver's license a moment longer than necessary before glancing toward Cooper. Their eyes met briefly, exchanging a silent understanding that Marcus quietly noticed. Brooks continued asking routine questions. Where had Marcus been tonight? Why was he driving through this neighborhood? Was the vehicle registered in his name? Every answer Marcus gave was simple, polite, and completely consistent. Yet each response seemed to invite another question instead of ending the conversation. Across the street, a small convenience store prepared to close for the evening. A father carried 2 grocery bags toward his pickup truck while his young son paused beside the entrance, fascinated by the flashing patrol lights dancing across the wet pavement. The child looked toward Marcus with innocent curiosity, unaware that he was witnessing a moment neither of them would ever forget. Brooks finally stepped back and asked Marcus to leave the vehicle while Cooper began looking through the interior. Marcus complied without argument. He closed the driver's door gently behind him and stood beneath the cool drizzle with his hands relaxed at his sides. Rain collected along the shoulders of his gray jacket before sliding quietly to the ground. The silence grew strangely heavy. Cooper leaned inside the sedan for several long seconds. Then he straightened slowly, holding a small clear plastic package between 2 gloved fingers. Brooks turned toward Marcus, satisfaction spreading across his face as he lifted the package into the flashing lights. "Looks like we found something," he said confidently. The father across the street instinctively pulled his son a little closer. Marcus never looked at the package. Instead, he looked directly into Brooks's eyes. There was no fear in his expression, no anger, and no desperation. Only calm certainty. Then, with the same quiet voice he had used since the stop began, Marcus spoke a sentence that seemed almost too simple to matter. "Officer, are you absolutely certain you want to keep going?" For a brief moment, even the rain seemed to hesitate. "Before we continue, if you enjoy powerful stories that reveal the strength of the human spirit and the choices that shape our lives, subscribe to Narralight. Every story has a lesson, every choice has a consequence, and sometimes the smallest moment changes everything. Now, let's see what happens next." Marcus held Daniel Brooks's gaze without blinking. The question hung in the cool night air, carried away only by the gentle patter of rain striking the roof of the patrol car. Brooks answered with nothing more than a confident smile before lowering the evidence pouch into a larger collection bag as though he had completed another ordinary traffic stop. Ryan Cooper continued examining the sedan with deliberate movements, occasionally calling out ordinary items for the record. A folded umbrella, a phone charger, a grocery receipt from earlier that evening, family photographs tucked neatly behind the driver's visor. Everything inside the vehicle reflected the life of a careful, organized man. Yet Brooks seemed interested in only one item. Marcus remained silent. He understood that some moments were shaped not by what a person said, but by what others chose to reveal about themselves. A cool breeze carried the scent of rain and pine across the empty roadside. Somewhere beyond the trees, a freight train sounded its distant horn before fading into the darkness. Across the street, the father quietly loaded his groceries into the pickup truck while his young son continued watching from behind the passenger door. The boy's eyes never left Marcus. He seemed unable to understand why the calm man standing beside the gray sedan looked so different from the picture Brooks appeared determined to create. Marcus noticed the child and, for just a second, remembered another evening many years earlier when he had stood beside his own father outside a neighborhood grocery store. His father had once told him that character was measured most clearly when someone else tried to define you unfairly. Marcus had carried those words through military service, difficult assignments, and every challenge that followed. Tonight, they felt as steady as the rain falling around him. Brooks stepped closer and spoke with practiced authority. He explained the situation as though every conclusion had already been reached. Marcus listened carefully without interrupting. His expression never changed. Cooper finished photographing the interior of the sedan before closing the driver's door. Every flash of the camera reflected across the wet pavement like brief streaks of lightning. Marcus quietly observed the sequence of events, the timing of each photograph, the order in which items were handled, and the conversations exchanged between the two officers. Years of professional discipline had taught him that details often mattered far more than emotions. Brooks finally asked Marcus to place his hands behind his back. Marcus complied without resistance. The metal restraints clicked into place with calm precision. Even then, Marcus showed no frustration. His breathing remained slow and controlled. Brooks appeared almost disappointed by the lack of argument. He seemed to expect raised voices or desperate protests. Instead, Marcus simply asked, "May I know exactly what you believe happened here tonight?" Brooks answered with quiet certainty, convinced that the evidence would speak for itself. Marcus nodded once and said nothing more. The silence unsettled Cooper far more than any argument might have. As Marcus was guided toward the rear seat of the patrol vehicle, the young boy across the street tugged gently on his father's sleeve. The father leaned down as the child whispered something only he could hear. After a thoughtful pause, the father looked back toward Marcus with a different expression than before. It was no longer curiosity. It was uncertainty. Marcus settled into the back seat and looked through the rain-speckled window. Reflections of blue lights rippled across the glass, while water slowly traced winding paths toward the door frame. He closed his eyes for only a brief moment, remembering his mother's smile from dinner and the quiet reminder she had given him before he left. Never let someone else's choices decide who you become. He opened his eyes again with the same calm resolve. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, unseen engines continued moving steadily toward the roadside, carrying people who understood far more about this night than anyone standing beneath the flashing lights could possibly imagine. The rear door of the patrol vehicle closed with a solid click, leaving Marcus surrounded by the muted hum of the engine and the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windows. Outside, Daniel Brooks spoke quietly with Ryan Cooper while organizing paperwork beneath the shelter of the open trunk. Their movements were methodical, practiced, almost mechanical, as though they had rehearsed every step countless times before. Marcus watched them through the rain-speckled glass without changing his expression. He did not measure the moment by fear. He measured it by patience. The blue emergency lights swept across the inside of the vehicle in slow pulses, painting shifting reflections over the empty seat beside him. Beyond the flashing lights, the father finished loading groceries into his pickup truck, yet neither he nor his young son drove away. The boy remained fascinated by the scene unfolding across the road, his small hands pressed lightly against the passenger window, as though trying to understand something that did not fit the lessons he had learned about fairness. Marcus noticed the child again, and quietly hoped the night would ultimately teach him that truth often took longer to arrive than appearances. Brooks returned to the patrol vehicle, carrying a clipboard. He paused beside the rear door, looking directly at Marcus before speaking through the partially lowered window. His tone carried the confidence of someone convinced the outcome had already been decided. Marcus answered every question calmly, never raising his voice, never interrupting, never allowing frustration to shape his words. Cooper continued photographing the sedan from additional angles, carefully documenting every ordinary detail. The older car sat quietly beneath the rain, its clean interior illuminated by the rotating emergency lights. Family photographs remained tucked behind the visor. The folded umbrella rested untouched in the rear seat. A neatly packed overnight bag remained exactly where Marcus had left it. Everything reflected an ordinary evening that had suddenly become anything but ordinary. Brooks stepped away again, speaking softly enough that Marcus could not hear every word, yet close enough for him to notice the rhythm of the conversation. Cooper nodded several times before glancing briefly toward the empty highway stretching beyond the intersection. The younger officer appeared confident, but not completely comfortable. Marcus had seen that look before during difficult investigations. Confidence built on assumptions often became uncertainty when unexpected facts appeared. The rain gradually softened into a light mist. Thin clouds drifted apart, allowing pale moonlight to blend with the flashing patrol lights across the wet pavement. The entire roadside seemed suspended between silence and anticipation. Marcus leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes for only a moment. His thoughts returned to the small kitchen where his mother had laughed over dessert just an hour earlier. She had always believed that integrity revealed itself most clearly when nobody else seemed willing to protect it. Those words had shaped every important decision he had ever made. They had carried him through military service, years of specialized federal training, and assignments that demanded discipline above emotion. He opened his eyes again and looked through the windshield toward the dark highway beyond the patrol cars. Somewhere beyond the distant curve of the road, headlights appeared briefly before disappearing behind a stand of tall pine trees. Then another pair emerged. Then another. They were still too far away for Brooks or Cooper to pay them any attention, blending naturally with the occasional nighttime traffic moving across the county. Marcus recognized something different. The spacing was precise. The speed was steady. The formation was disciplined. He said nothing. Brooks remained focused on his paperwork, unaware that the quiet confidence filling the roadside was about to be tested by events neither he nor his partner had anticipated. The rain had nearly stopped altogether, leaving only the faint sound of water dripping from tree branches as the approaching headlights slowly drew closer through the Carolina night. Daniel Brooks tucked the clipboard beneath his arm and glanced once more toward the quiet highway before returning to the patrol vehicle. The confidence in his posture suggested that the evening was unfolding exactly as he expected. Ryan Cooper finished securing the last evidence bag and closed the trunk with a deliberate motion, the metallic sound echoing softly across the nearly deserted roadside. The rain had faded into little more than a cool mist, leaving beads of water clinging to the patrol car windows while the emergency lights continued washing the pavement in slow waves of blue and red. Marcus remained seated in the back of the vehicle, his breathing steady, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes following every movement outside without urgency. The silence inside the patrol car felt almost sacred, broken only by the gentle hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of a distant police radio. Brooks opened the rear door halfway and looked directly at Marcus. "You have been unusually calm all night," he said. "Most people in your position have a lot more to say." Marcus met his eyes without hesitation. "Talking does not change facts, officer. Facts eventually speak for themselves." Brooks gave a brief smile that carried more confidence than curiosity. "We already have the facts." Marcus nodded politely. "If you believe that, then I hope every decision you made tonight is one you would gladly explain tomorrow." Brooks studied him for a second longer than before. Something about Marcus's composure no longer felt ordinary. It was not defiance. It was certainty. Yet Brooks dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it appeared. He stepped back and closed the rear door once again. Across the street, the father finally started his pickup truck, but instead of pulling away immediately, he remained parked at the edge of the lot. His young son still watched through the side window, fascinated by the strange contrast between the officer's confidence and the quiet dignity of the man sitting alone in the patrol vehicle. Neither father nor son spoke. The night itself seemed to be holding its breath. Cooper approached Brooks with several completed forms, pointing toward one section before quietly asking a question. Brooks answered with a short nod and signed the paperwork without hesitation. Their routine appeared smooth, practiced, and efficient, yet small cracks had begun to appear beneath the surface. Cooper glanced more frequently toward the highway. Brooks checked his watch twice within a minute. Neither man realized that anticipation had slowly replaced certainty. Marcus leaned his head lightly against the cool window and watched faint reflections ripple across the glass. His mother's words returned once again with remarkable clarity. The hardest test of character comes when nobody else knows the truth yet. He smiled almost imperceptibly. She had never understood the details of his work because he could never tell her, but somehow she had always understood the weight it carried. Beyond the line of tall pine trees, several distant headlights became brighter. One pair became three became six. They moved with disciplined spacing, neither rushing nor slowing, their beams cutting clean paths through the lingering mist. Brooks noticed them at last, but paid little attention, assuming they belonged to ordinary traffic heading toward the interstate. Cooper looked a little longer before returning his attention to the paperwork. Marcus remained perfectly still. He did not celebrate. He did not anticipate victory. He simply watched the approaching lights grow steadily larger until their reflections began dancing across the wet pavement beside the patrol cars. The quiet roadside, which only moments earlier had felt forgotten by the rest of the world, suddenly carried the unmistakable feeling that an unseen chapter was about to begin, and every choice made during the last 30 minutes was about to matter far more than anyone standing beneath the flashing lights had ever imagined. The distant headlights grew brighter with every passing second, their reflections stretching across the rain-dark pavement until the quiet roadside no longer felt isolated. Daniel Brooks glanced toward the approaching vehicles once, then returned to reviewing the paperwork in his hands. Ryan Cooper shifted his weight uneasily and looked down the highway again, noticing that the vehicles maintained perfect spacing instead of the uneven rhythm of ordinary nighttime traffic. Marcus remained seated behind the closed rear door, his calm expression unchanged as soft blue light swept across the window in slow pulses. He did not watch Brooks anymore. Instead, he watched the reflections of the approaching headlights growing steadily larger on the wet asphalt. Inside the patrol vehicle, the air carried the faint scent of rain and warm engine oil. Outside, the mist drifted lazily through the flashing lights, softening the outlines of trees that bordered the empty road. Across the street, the father finally turned off his pickup truck instead of leaving. His young son leaned forward once more, curiosity overcoming the promise of going home. The child sensed what adults often overlooked. Something important was about to happen. Brooks opened the rear door again and looked at Marcus with measured confidence. "Last chance to explain yourself," he said evenly. Marcus answered without hesitation. "The truth does not become stronger because someone repeats it. It simply waits." Brooks let out a quiet laugh that echoed briefly against the empty roadway. "You really believe everything is going to change?" Marcus met his eyes. Everything already changed the moment each decision was made. Brooks closed the door once again, dismissing the response as another attempt to sound mysterious. Cooper walked toward him carrying another folder. "Do we call this in now?" he asked quietly. Brooks nodded. "Finish the report first." Cooper hesitated only a fraction of a second before returning to the trunk of the patrol car. That hesitation did not escape Marcus's attention. It also did not escape the father watching from across the street. Small doubts often appeared long before people admitted them aloud. The approaching headlights finally reached the long curve leading into the intersection. One black sport utility vehicle appeared first, followed by another, then another behind it. None displayed flashing emergency lights yet. They moved with remarkable discipline, slowing together as they approached the roadside. Brooks frowned slightly, trying to determine why so many identical vehicles were traveling together at this hour. Cooper stopped writing altogether. The quiet confidence that had filled the roadside only minutes earlier slowly gave way to uncertainty. Marcus rested his head lightly against the cool glass and closed his eyes for a single deep breath. He remembered his mother's gentle voice before dinner. When your heart is clear, you never need to chase justice. Sometimes you only need the patience to let it arrive. Those words settled over him like warmth against the cool night air. He opened his eyes just as the lead vehicle reduced speed and activated discrete amber marker lights. The remaining vehicles followed in perfect synchronization, forming an orderly line several yards behind the patrol cars. Their engines idled quietly, neither hurried nor aggressive, creating an atmosphere of controlled purpose rather than chaos. Brooks slowly lowered the clipboard in his hands. Cooper instinctively looked from the vehicles to Marcus and then back again. Neither officer spoke. Even the radio traffic seemed to fade beneath the steady sound of engines and dripping rain. Marcus remained exactly where he was, his breathing calm, his posture relaxed, his expression carrying the quiet certainty of someone who had been waiting not for rescue, but for the precise moment when every unanswered question would finally receive its answer. Before we continue, if you enjoy inspiring stories about courage, second chances, and people who choose kindness when it matters most, subscribe to Narralight. Our stories remind us that one decision, one voice, or one act of compassion can change a life forever. Now, let's see what happened next. The engines continued idling with quiet precision as the line of dark sport utility vehicles settled along the shoulder behind the patrol cars. Their headlights cut through the thinning mist, casting long beams across the wet pavement without a single unnecessary movement. Daniel Brooks stood motionless for a brief second, his attention fixed on the unexpected convoy. Ryan Cooper lowered the folder in his hands, his confidence fading beneath growing uncertainty. Neither officer recognized the vehicles, yet both instinctively understood they were not part of ordinary nighttime traffic. Marcus remained seated in the back of the patrol vehicle, watching soft reflections ripple across the rain-speckled window. His breathing never changed. His hands rested calmly in his lap. He had spent years learning that the loudest moments in life were often preceded by extraordinary silence. The father across the street quietly stepped out of his pickup truck, placing one reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Even from a distance, they sensed the atmosphere had shifted. The roadside no longer belonged solely to the flashing patrol lights. It belonged to something larger that had not yet revealed itself. Brooks slowly approached the nearest vehicle, stopping several yards away as the driver's door opened. A woman in a dark suit stepped out carrying herself with quiet confidence. She wore no dramatic expression, no visible urgency, only the composed professionalism of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. Behind her, several other professionally dressed men and women exited the remaining vehicles, each moving with deliberate coordination. No one rushed. No one raised a voice. They simply spread out across the roadside with calm purpose. Brooks instinctively straightened his posture. "Good evening," he called. "Can I help you?" The woman offered a polite nod, but did not answer immediately. Instead, her eyes briefly swept across the patrol cars, Marcus's sedan, the evidence bags resting near the open trunk, and finally the patrol vehicle where Marcus quietly waited. Her expression remained unreadable, though something in her careful attention caused Cooper to glance uneasily toward Brooks. The mist drifted between everyone like a thin curtain, while distant thunder rolled softly across the Carolina sky without bringing fresh rain. Marcus closed his eyes for a single slow breath. His thoughts returned once more to the small kitchen where his mother had poured coffee after dinner and smiled with the peaceful certainty that had guided him since childhood. She had always believed that patience was not weakness but strength under control. Looking through the window now, Marcus realized those words had never mattered more than they did tonight. Brooks attempted another smile, this one noticeably more restrained than before. "This is an active investigation," he said evenly. "If there is something you need, we can coordinate after we finish here." The woman looked toward him with quiet respect before replying in an equally calm voice. "That will not be necessary." Cooper shifted his weight again. His eyes drifted toward Marcus, who remained perfectly composed despite everything that had unfolded. The contrast became impossible to ignore. The man sitting alone inside the patrol vehicle appeared more at peace than anyone standing outside it. A gentle breeze carried away the last traces of rain clouds, revealing scattered stars above the treetops. The flashing blue lights reflected across shallow puddles while the first faint hint of dawn began softening the eastern horizon. No dramatic words filled the silence. No hurried movements disturbed the stillness. Every person present seemed to understand that the next few moments would not be decided by emotion, assumption, or appearance. They would be decided by truth, and truth, like the first light before sunrise, had already begun to arrive. The woman in the dark suit took one measured step forward, the polished leather of her shoes barely disturbing the thin layer of rainwater that covered the pavement. Behind her, the men and women who had arrived in the line of identical sport utility vehicles spread out quietly, each carrying the calm confidence of seasoned professionals. No one reached for equipment. No one raised a voice. The stillness itself carried authority. Daniel Brooks glanced from one unfamiliar face to another before finally speaking again. "Ma'am, this is an active investigation." The woman nodded politely. "We know." Her answer was brief, almost gentle, yet it settled over the roadside with unexpected weight. Ryan Cooper looked toward the patrol vehicle, then back to Brooks, searching for reassurance that no longer appeared on his partner's face. The father, across the street, instinctively placed both hands on his son's shoulders as they continued watching from beside their pickup truck. The child sensed the change, even if he could not yet understand it. The flashing blue lights no longer dominated the scene. Something quieter and far more decisive had taken their place. The woman reached inside her jacket and calmly presented official federal identification. Brooks accepted it, studying the credentials far longer than before. His confident expression faded almost imperceptibly. "Special Agent Laura Mitchell," he read quietly. She nodded once. "Good evening, officer." Brooks returned the identification with careful hands. "What brings your team here?" Laura looked past him toward the patrol vehicle. "We are here because we have been monitoring tonight's events." Cooper's eyes widened slightly. Brooks remained silent. Laura continued in the same calm voice. "Please ask Mr. Marcus Reed to step out of the vehicle." Brooks hesitated. It was the first visible hesitation anyone had seen from him all night. Slowly, he walked to the rear door and unlocked it. Marcus stepped onto the wet pavement with the same composed expression he had carried from the beginning. His jacket was lightly speckled with rain, and the soft glow of approaching dawn reflected across the road behind him. Laura offered him a respectful nod. "Good evening, Agent Reed." Marcus returned the greeting with quiet professionalism. "Good evening, Laura." The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire highway. Brooks looked from Marcus to Laura and back again, trying to reconcile the ordinary man he had stopped with the title he had just heard. Marcus calmly reached inside his jacket after receiving Laura's acknowledgement and produced a federal credential wallet. He opened it slowly, allowing Brooks and Cooper to read the identification clearly beneath the flashing patrol lights. The gold badge reflected a narrow beam of blue light before settling back into the shadows. Neither officer spoke. Marcus closed the credential wallet without drama and slipped it back into his jacket. "I tried to encourage careful decisions tonight," he said quietly. "Every choice matters." Laura stepped beside him. "Agent Reed has been assigned to a long-term federal investigation involving allegations of official misconduct. Tonight's incident became part of that investigation the moment it unfolded." Cooper lowered his eyes toward the wet pavement. Brooks remained completely still, his clipboard hanging loosely at his side. Around them, the first pale colors of sunrise slowly replaced the darkness above the Carolina treetops. The father across the street looked down at his son, who whispered he was telling the truth. The father nodded softly, unable to find better words. Marcus did not celebrate. He did not smile with satisfaction. Instead, he looked quietly across the peaceful roadside where rainwater reflected both the fading patrol lights and the first light of morning. In that silent moment, everyone present understood the same lesson. Authority could command attention, but only truth could command lasting respect. The first rays of sunrise slowly spilled across the roadside, softening the sharp flashes of blue emergency lights until they no longer dominated the scene. Moisture clung to the pavement like polished glass, reflecting both the fading darkness and the quiet promise of a new morning. Marcus Reed stood beside Special Agent Laura Mitchell without a trace of triumph on his face. His expression remained the same calm reflection of discipline that had carried him through the entire night. Daniel Brooks lowered his eyes toward the wet asphalt, still holding the clipboard that only minutes earlier had represented certainty. Ryan Cooper quietly set the evidence folder on the hood of the patrol vehicle, his shoulders noticeably heavier than before. No one hurried to fill the silence. It was the kind of silence that allowed every choice to settle naturally into memory. Laura spoke first, her voice measured and professional. Our responsibility now is to preserve every fact exactly as it happened. Several members of the federal team began documenting the roadside with careful attention, photographing vehicle positions, recording timestamps, and respectfully speaking with the few witnesses who remained nearby. The father across the street answered their questions honestly, while his young son stood quietly beside him, watching Marcus with growing admiration instead of confusion. The child had arrived believing authority alone determined the truth. He now understood that character could quietly outlast appearances. Marcus walked slowly toward Brooks, stopping several feet away. There was no anger in his eyes and no satisfaction in his posture. Brooks looked up cautiously, expecting criticism that never came. Marcus spoke with the same steady voice he had used from the beginning of the encounter. Every badge represents trust before it represents authority. People remember how they are treated long after they forget names or dates. Brooks remained silent. His earlier confidence had disappeared, replaced by thoughtful reflection. Cooper quietly listened without interrupting. Marcus continued. There are thousands of honorable officers who earn that trust every single day. Their work matters because the public believes fairness still exists. Every individual decision either strengthens that belief or weakens it. Brooks slowly nodded. For the first time that night, he did not search for another explanation. The words settled naturally because they carried no accusation, only truth. Laura watched the exchange without interfering. She had worked beside Marcus long enough to understand that his greatest strength had never been investigation techniques or tactical planning. It was his refusal to let difficult moments erase his respect for other people. Even after long nights and complicated assignments, he believed integrity was measured by how someone behaved when given every reason to become bitter. The federal team completed their documentation with quiet efficiency while dawn gradually brightened the Carolina sky. Birds began singing from the nearby pine trees, replacing the steady rhythm of falling rain that had accompanied the night. The flashing emergency lights were finally switched off one by one, allowing natural sunlight to reclaim the empty roadway. The convenience store owner unlocked the front door for the new day, pausing briefly to observe the peaceful conclusion before returning to ordinary business. The father gently rested his hand on his son's shoulder once more. Remember this, he said softly. Real strength stays calm. The boy nodded, never taking his eyes off Marcus. Marcus glanced toward the small family and offered a quiet smile before turning back to Laura. Together they walked toward the waiting federal vehicles, not with celebration but with quiet purpose. Behind them, the roadside looked almost ordinary again, yet everyone who had stood there understood that something far more important than an investigation had unfolded. It had become a reminder that patience, dignity, and integrity could reveal the truth more clearly than anger ever could, and that the strongest victories were often the ones that ended not with applause, but with understanding. Several months later, autumn sunlight filtered gently through the maple trees surrounding a quiet neighborhood park in Charlotte. The air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and children laughed as they chased one another across the grass, while parents watched from nearby benches. Life had moved forward, just as it always did. News headlines had long since disappeared, official reports had been completed, and the roadside where everything had changed had returned to being just another stretch of pavement. Marcus Reed preferred it that way. Recognition had never been the reason he chose his work. Early that Saturday morning, he parked the same aging gray sedan outside his mother's small brick home. The familiar porch swing creaked softly in the breeze, and bright marigolds lined the front steps exactly as they had every season for years. Before Marcus could knock, the front door opened. His mother smiled as though she had been expecting him all along. "You look tired," she said warmly. Marcus laughed quietly. "Just a long few months." She stepped aside, inviting him inside where the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon filled the house. Nothing had changed. The family photographs still lined the hallway. The old record player still rested beside the living room window. The same knitted blanket remained folded across the couch. Marcus felt something he rarely experienced during assignments. Peace. They sat together at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the polished wood while steam curled gently upward from 2 coffee mugs. His mother studied him for a moment before asking the only question that truly mattered. Did you stay true to yourself? Marcus looked down at the coffee, remembering the rain, the flashing lights, the long silence before sunrise, and every decision that followed. Then he smiled. I tried. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. That is enough. Across town, Special Agent Laura Mitchell walked through the federal office carrying another case file beneath her arm. New investigations had already begun. New people would need protection. New choices would shape new stories. Before entering the building, she paused beside the entrance and looked toward the city skyline, glowing beneath the morning sun. She knew every successful investigation eventually faded from public memory, but the values behind those investigations never should. Inside the lobby, a bronze plaque caught the light from the glass ceiling. It read, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching." Laura smiled quietly before continuing down the hallway. That afternoon, Marcus returned to the same neighborhood where the traffic stop had taken place. The road looked ordinary beneath the clear blue sky. Cars passed without slowing. Families walked along the sidewalks. Near the convenience store, he noticed the father and young son from that rainy night. The boy recognized him immediately and waved enthusiastically. Marcus waved back. The father crossed the parking lot with a grateful smile. He still talks about that night, he said. Not because of what happened, but because of what he learned. Marcus glanced at the boy, who stood a little taller now, holding a library book under one arm. What did he learn? The father smiled. That calm is stronger than anger, and truth takes patience. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Those are lessons worth keeping. As the sun slowly dipped toward the horizon, Marcus walked back to his sedan. A gentle breeze carried golden leaves across the quiet street. He looked once more at the peaceful neighborhood before starting the engine. There was no applause, no celebration, and no final speech waiting for him. There was only another ordinary evening, another road ahead, and the quiet certainty that kindness, integrity, and patience would always outlast fear, because in the end, the strongest victories were never measured by the power someone held, but by the character they refused to surrender. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Narralight for more powerful stories that remind us to look beyond appearances, challenge prejudice, and never underestimate the impact of doing what's right. Because sometimes, the smallest act of courage creates the biggest change. Thank you for watching. Remember, the world changes one choice at a time. We'll see you in the next story.